Okay, good morning. My name is Errol Close. I'm the head of the Environment Advisory Unit in the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. And you might note the change in our department's title as a respect of the recent government changes. So it's Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. What I'd like to do this morning is take you through the policy context from our department to inform future research in the area. I'd like to just take you through the programme for government itself and some of the commitments in there to research and to environment and climate, and then look at the four thematic areas that are outlined in the proposed EPA research strategy and talk through some of the overlaps with our own remit from a policy context. To talk about the programme for government, quite a lot of commitments to sustainability and sustainable outlooks in the programme for government. I think there's upwards of almost 50 references to sustainability across the document itself, but most importantly, from a research perspective, it commits to this transformational programme of research and development and should be really, as you can look through the list there yourself, covers quite a broad range of areas. And I suppose a fundamental piece from our perspective would be how to achieve that 7% commitment of reductions per annum in GHG over the next decade and a 51% in total over the next decade reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but also net zero emissions by 2050. You can see there it talks about things like offshore wind, coastlines, feed additives, the use of land, biogenic methane, but also this idea of challenge calls towards the end. So it really talks about how research can play a role in the environmental outlook and the policy decisions we need to make over the coming years. In terms of looking at one of those, looking at addressing the climate change and challenges, one of the key aspects that's come over the last number of days or weeks has been the development of the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Bill, and publicly announcement was last week. So this really firmly establishes that 2050 emissions target. It brings in an idea of 5-year economy-wide carbon budgets, looking at each sector and the commitment each sector can make. It looks at strengthening that Climate Change Advisory Council, annual revisions of the Climate Action Plan and long-term climate action strategies at least every decade. And there's a clear requirement for local authorities in there, along with stronger oversight for the Oireachtas. But particularly around this, the idea of the 2050 target, the 5-year carbon budgets, and the revision of the Climate Action Plan on an ongoing basis, research has a key role to play in terms of providing the evidence base for some of the policy decision making that needs to be happening around those key aspects. One of the key aspects, I think, in terms of developing that research base is going to be the 5-year climate assessment report, which the EPA will be undertaking now. There's 4 clear volumes, largely based around the IPCC reports. And I think this is a fundamentally important piece of work in terms of setting out where the policy gaps are, the research gaps and the knowledge gaps are, and what role research can play to try and make sure there's better alignment between research and the policy environment it's trying to influence. In terms of delivering a safe and healthy environment, there's a few aspects beyond just climate that we need to take into consideration here. So if you look at things like air quality, residential solid fuel burning, the transition towards lower carbon and lower polluting versions of our heating and our domestic properties, transport, be it some of the less known ones like air and shipping, and how to address some of the emissions and air quality aspects related to those, but also in a broader sphere. The Commission's recently published chemical strategy for a sustainable towards a toxic-free environment. I mean, this looks at chemicals in consumer products, the prevention approach, safe and sustainable design, zero pollution, and another aspect would be the chemicals, products and waste interchange and how we can develop products in a way that allows us to recycle them and develop a circular economy outlook without any of the concerns that some of the chemicals within those would bring. So real areas here where research and technical knowledge and expertise can play a role in developing the outlook and the approaches we need to take, but also married with quite a lot of consumer and individual behaviours. So how do we incentivize people to change the way that they burn fuels in their houses, how they travel, etc., to try and drive the changes that we need in terms of achieving these environmental outlooks. From a point of view of protecting and restoring nature, and I know Cliona will be giving you a presentation on the biodiversity aspects, but just from our own perspective, some of the air pollution and other pollution outlooks that I've talked about earlier in the presentation, what are the impacts of those on our ecosystems? How do we develop good soil health or maintain good soil health? And beyond that, in land use, the programme for government commits to a land use strategy or a development of a land use strategy, which looks at things like different ways we can use our land, such as biodiversity, but also the role that might play in terms of sequestration. And beyond that, it even talks about the marine space and how that could possibly be used for sequestration. And there's quite a lot of overlaps in trades between the different uses there in terms of the bioeconomy, climate outlook, mitigation. And it's about how to understand all those overlaps, interchanges, and interdependencies. And research, I think, is a key role to play in developing our understanding of that. Finally, towards a green and circular economy, we have recently published a waste action plan for a circular economy. Quite a large or broad-ranging document covering a broad range of areas around waste and development of a circular economy outlook. Just to mention a few of them, and I think a number of these were research and innovation. The document itself has an entire chapter on research and innovation and points to a number of actions there in terms of how to bring industry and researchers closer together and trying to realise some of the opportunities there are to achieve a circular economy outlook. It talks about single-use plastics and plastic packaging, and there's quite a lot of change will need to happen in that space over the next number of years in terms of trying to achieve the outcomes we want. It talks about food waste, construction and demolition waste, and it talks about introducing new concepts or approaches in an Ireland context anyway, around deposit and return schemes, for example. And some of you may have noticed that there is a consultation out there at present on the approach or the different models that could be applied to deployment of deposit and return schemes in Ireland. And then beyond that, there's also things around treatment and enforcement. But again, at its heart, there's a large block of this is down to individual behaviours, both at consumer level, but also at business level, in terms of making sure waste finds its way into the right streams when it becomes a waste. But in advance of that, trying to reduce usage and trying to incentivize reuse of products within the economy. So quite a lot of work again and knowledge gaps that could be addressed through valuable research. I looked back at key messages I delivered at the beginning of this year in a similar presentation to this forum. And I thought actually the key messages remain the same. There's no need to change them. While the content of the presentation has changed, my department still has a very busy and wide policy brief, and it crosses across each of the thematic hubs in the proposed research strategy. Quite a lot of these challenges that we face are not purely technical challenges. Low technical knowledge and insight can be very helpful to the policy making decisions, but they're also fundamental economic and societal challenges, and therefore the research base that we need to sort of give us the information to inform the decisions is much broader than just a technical and environmental outlook. Research is a key tenet of evidence-based policy making, and I think it could be much further improved in terms of the alignment, but also the dissemination and engagement between policymakers and on research institutions. And I think that's on both sides to try and work together to improve that. And I think there's more to do on ensuring the outputs address the knowledge gaps that we would have as policymakers, and to try and make sure that it goes as far as it can to informing policymaking and deliberation on future research needs. And I think pieces of work like that proposed under the 5-year climate assessment report are really valuable in bringing those different actors together to explore how best to kind of address and identify the research gaps and knowledges that we need to inform the decisions for the rest of the next decade. On those remarks, I'll conclude, but just to thank you for your attention. I'm hoping to take any questions you may wish to ask, and I look forward to further engagement over the course of the remainder of the event. Thank you.